Today's topic might seem pretty heavy, but I'm honestly excited about it because it has the information that millions of people need to free themselves from shame and blame. So let me start by asking you a question. What would you do in this situation? Let's say you're in a job interview and the interviewer starts to ask you inappropriate questions. Do you wear bras to work? Do you consider yourself sexually desirable? What would you do? Now, most people say, I would tell them to stop. I would leave. I would report it. But here's the fascinating thing. In 2001, there was a study with college-age women. Half of them were interviewed and asked what they would do if they faced sexual harassment. And 100% of those women said they would resist it. They would ask the interviewer to stop. They would leave. They would report it. Like, great, they know what they should do. But as part of the study, the other half of the women attended a job interview and were asked those inappropriate questions. What percentage of them do you think told the interviewer to stop? It was 0. So the researchers saw a startling response in the video recordings of these interactions. The women sat patiently and answered the questions while smiling. And this is the crazy thing. We see a similar thing with sexual violence. The vast majority of victims can't speak, or they go limp, or they might comply, or even compliment the abuser. Then they blame themselves for what happened. And it turns out there's a reason buried in our primal brains that victims respond in such unexpected and even shocking ways. So in this video, I'm going to explain the science of the Freeze, Appease, and Fawn response that shows that compliant behavior, it's not your fault, but there is something you can do about it. So let's jump in. The freeze, appease, or fawn response can be triggered in response to situations ranging from sexual harassment to sexual assault. And to illustrate this point, I'm going to tell a story that I do not believe will be too triggering, so please stick with me here. I have this friend and she's a new lawyer, very intelligent, hardcoresy, outdoorsy. She did some legal work for a couple and they offered to take her to lunch as a thank you. And she pulls up to the restaurant and she was surprised to see that the wife wasn't there. Then, as they're walking in, the man takes hold of her hand. And she is not a fan of this, but she assumes that it's because the ground is a little uneven. Did I mention that this guy is like 85 years old? Okay, so anyways, he holds her hand as they walk in, and she kind of like shakes him off once they get inside. And then he makes sure they get a booth seat. She asks him where his wife is, and he goes into this little spiel about how he just wants to be there for her. And then he scoots closer to her, and he asks her if she wants to be his girlfriend. And she says no, and he explains how he's got a bunch of girlfriends, as if like that's a turn on. And she's just truly stuck in this place of like trying not to be rude and not make a scene, but she's also completely disgusted and kind of panicking inside. She feels trapped. Remember, she's a new lawyer, like she needs to keep clients. She needs good referrals, right? They order lunch and he continues to proposition her. So finally, she asks for her salad to go and she gets up to leave. And he says, "Why did you come to lunch with me if you didn't want to be with me?" And I'm just like, like, ugh. Here's what she said to me in a text later. "It was horrible. I should have left the moment I got a bad vibe, but I didn't. I just froze. I did learn that it might, or I think it might be helpful to talk to my kids about those kinds of situations and give them the tools to maybe not freeze and get out sooner. Is that possible, or do we all just freeze?" Now, from the outside, it is so easy to say, why didn't you just get up and leave? Why didn't you shout no to his face? But it's like literally just so easy to freeze up. And I would guess that many of you would say, I've been there. Now, most of us at some time have been coerced into something we didn't actually want. And often our response has been one of compliance. This can run the spectrum of being polite when someone's hitting on you, to smiling at sexual harassment, to being compliant during sexual violence. And I would say every single survivor of sexual assault that I've met with in therapy froze during the assault, and most submitted, most complied, and most felt immense shame afterwards. Heck, one time when I was 16, some guy on the street grabbed my butt, and I was so shocked that I actually apologized to him. Okay, so what's going on here? Why on earth would we freeze up in the face of sexual harassment or violence? It's a deeply rooted survival reflex. It's much deeper than thinking, and it's just your nervous system trying to keep you alive. Let's take a look at my chart to understand what's going on here. We all start off feeling safe. We do have a state of safety that is not on this chart. But when faced with a threat that we believe we can defeat, our first instinct is to defend ourselves. So let's say that a 10-year-old kid comes up to me and starts talking trash. I might laugh him off. I might call him dumb. I might threaten to tell his mom or call the cops, right? Defend, attack, posture, threaten. This is the fight response. But then if there's a guy who approaches me on a motorcycle on the street, he's bigger than I am much more likely to run inside of a building because I believe I can escape. So the flight response kicks in. Now let's move into a situation where I have less power and less control. Let's say I'm a single mom who needs a job to feed my kids. I believe that I have little power and control in the big financial world, and I really need this job. So when faced with harassment at work, I might be much more likely to slip into the fawn, or also known as the appease response. And when faced with sexual violence, when your life might be in danger, your body may trigger an even more extreme reaction, which is the freeze response or the shutdown response. But before we get there, let's spend a little more time on this fawn response or freeze response, as it's sometimes called. This is a deeply rooted protective reflex that many people, but especially women, engage in when faced with harassments or assault. We protect ourselves through complying, being polite, and doing anything we can to de-escalate a situation. Like when I apologized to the guy who grabbed my butt. Now, this is not a conscious decision. The survival centers of my brain made the decision to apologize before I even knew what had happened. With the fawn or the appease response, it's common to laugh, smile, or even befriend the attacker in order to avoid worse violence. Victims also plead or cry sometimes. And it's interesting because research shows that crying limits the aggressive hormones and behaviors of men. Here's the other thing. People, especially women, are trained by society to be nice and easygoing. We're taught that we should be sweet, not fight. But people-pleasing isn't just a learned behavior, it's a state of the nervous system. And this can be very confusing because from the outside it may look like consent. But the main thing I want you to understand is that fawning isn't a choice. It's a survival strategy shaped by fear. Now, as our perception of threat increases, our nervous system triggers an even stronger mechanism, and this is the freeze response. You may shift from trying to talk your way out of it to freezing, going numb, going completely still, or even dissociating. Your nervous system may trigger a physiological response called tonic immobility. Tonic immobility is a temporary involuntary state of paralysis that can happen when someone is faced with extreme fear or threat. They may be physically unable to move or speak. Breathing may become shallow, the body stiffens or goes limp, and there can be this sense of detachment or numbness. Some survivors described it this way. When I tried to scream, nothing came out. It was like the words just froze in my throat. I was trying to fight mentally. Inside of myself, I was screaming, stop, but my body would not move. Almost every animal, when faced with an overwhelming, inescapable threat, has this freeze survival response. And studies have found that 70% of rape survivors reported significant immobility during the assault, even when they wanted to move or scream. In addition to feeling paralyzed, people also reported feeling numb, dead inside. They described just waiting for it to be over. One survivor said, I could never bring myself to literally say the word no or fight back. My voice always just seemed to shrink away as my body went limp. Worse yet, sometimes I found myself smiling, hoping that by encouraging these behaviors in the moment, I could cooperate myself out of the situation. Just play along until you can escape, I thought. Now, not fighting back, not saying no, is not a form of consent or participation in a sexual act. It's actually your brain's most desperate attempt at survival. It's a reflex. It's not something you chose to do. This is the nervous system prioritizing survival. It's conserving energy. It's reducing pain perception. Sometimes it prevents further aggression from the attacker. So then I had this question, why does sexual violence elicit such a dramatic response from the nervous system? Sexual violence has been a tool of war for thousands of years. A woman being attacked by a violent soldier has little hope of escaping. She's much more likely to survive if her resistant impulses are deadened. Submitting and cooperating were her best hopes of survival. And our anciently evolved brain, and I personally believe the DNA that's passed down to us from our mothers and mothers and mothers and mothers, grandmothers, our bodies know better than we can realize. Freezing is one of the most common reactions to assault worldwide, and it affects long-term recovery. The survivors who experienced tonic immobility were much more likely to have PTSD symptoms later. So not only is that fear response trapped in the body, but the freeze response also seems to impair memory encoding, which leads to missing or confusing memories after the event. Okay, so what triggers tonic immobility? Your nervous system relies on social learning and reflexes to trigger one of these responses to a threat. When a threat arises, your nervous system subconsciously kind of does the math. It takes into account the severity of the threat. So this can include status, position, gender, weapons, the risk of recrimination. So that could be like losing your job, losing your position, physical punishment, mocking or name calling. That includes social rules like you should always be polite, or it's always the woman's fault. The social stories we have can contribute to the perception of threat. And there's another big factor at play. If someone's been abused in the past, they are much more likely to experience tonic immobility when faced with a new assault. So all of these factors inform your brain's reflexive decision about whether to fight back, freeze, or fawn. Okay, so let me summarize. Tonic immobility is a reflexive response. 70% of people who are sexually assaulted experience it, and it fuels PTSD. What do we do about it? First thing, people shouldn't assault people. Period. The end. The responsibility for this situation is on the abusers, not on the victims. Over 90% of sexual violence is perpetrated by men. Boys and men need to be taught to respect people, get consent, and should be corrected, punished, or locked up if they don't. While that's true, realistically, people who are sexually assaulting people probably aren't watching this video. So I could shout about that all day long, but it won't be as effective as teaching you some practical ways to take action. So the second thing is to forgive yourself for the past. Survivors often blame themselves for not fighting back. Society sometimes blames them too. Blaming victims for a survival strategy is not helpful. It just adds to the shame and the pain of the trauma. Your freeze response was trying to keep you safe, keep you alive. It's not your fault, and there is something you can do about it in the future. Forgive yourself for the past, and let's explore some actions to keep yourself safe in the future. You are not powerless. So here's number 3. You can train yourself to take different actions in the future. You cannot just think your way out of a survival reflex. You have to train a new reflex. So let me give you an example. When I was training to become a wilderness first responder, one day in class, someone ran in with their arm on fire, and I literally had no idea what to do. I froze. Now, it turns out the teacher had asked the student to do this. It was a relatively safe alcohol fire, but I froze. So what did we do about that freeze response? We trained and we trained for every situation. Broken bones, heart attacks, open chest wounds, spine injuries, burns, right? We practiced with stressful scenarios, sometimes out in the winter snow of Idaho. And by the end of the course, students would jump up in class with their arms on fire, or they would have a staged heart attack, or we'd be walking to class and come upon some avalanche victims in the snow. And because we had trained, we would jump into action. We had our acronyms and we knew what to do. We'd stabilize the spine and we'd start compressions, or we'd cover up the injury, or whatever action needed to be taken. My confidence grew and I no longer froze up. I knew what to do, and I had the muscle memory, the reflexes to do it. And I was able to use these skills in real life too. So a few months later, when I was mountain biking with friends and one of my friends broke her neck, I knew exactly what to do. My new reflexive response was to call for help, stabilize the spine, check the peripherals, monitor vitals, and she's fine now. You cannot just think your way out of a fawn or freeze response, but you can train yourself to respond in a safer way. 4th step, you're going to learn to use your voice. So I recommend practicing this in a self-defense class. And interestingly enough, the first thing you're going to learn in self-defense is to use your voice. And this includes practicing assertiveness out loud. So if you want to learn to be more assertive, you have to take situations, you have to write down what you're going to say. You have to practice in your bedroom saying it out loud over and over again. Please don't talk to me that way. No, stop. If you continue, I will report you, right? Like, this is how we practice assertiveness. We can't just read it or think about it or wish we're going to feel that way. We have to practice lines for each situation. And then the next, like what you will learn in a self-defense class is how to shout in an aggressor's face. Stop! No, I don't like that. Back off, right? If that makes you uncomfortable, which it probably will, that's a bigger sign that like this is a great chance to practice it. I practice this in RAD training and in multiple self-defense classes, and you can too. So with practice, you can teach your brain how to respond differently and keep yourself safer. I told you about a time I was in a foreign country and that man grabbed my butt. Well, 5 years later, I went back to live in that country, and it just so happened that a different guy started harassing my friend. And instead of freezing, I just hit him, like hard enough to knock him over, and he left us alone. So my new reflex was to fight instead of freeze. Okay, so you can learn to keep yourself safe in more situations by training yourself to respond a little differently to threatening situations. But even better, as we practice our new empowered responses, we heal from old trauma by releasing that pent-up freeze response. Okay, let me mention one more thing. The more resources you have, the safer you feel. When I fought back against that guy, I was older, I was stronger, I had a couple of more years experience in foreign countries. I had more training, I had more practice handling stressful situations, and I was in a group of 3 people. I wasn't alone. So each of these resources helped my nervous system perceive that this threat was something I could overcome, and I went into fight mode instead of freeze mode. So if we want to help our nervous system feel safer, we can do that by building up our resources. Basically, having resources protects our nervous system from getting stuck here. So what empowers people to feel safe? Economic freedom, people who will back you up, internal resources, assertiveness practice, and self-defense training can all be an important part of building up our internal resources so that we feel safer and that our nervous system responds with maybe a more adaptive response that can keep us safer. So we should all work together to make our streets, schools, homes, workplaces, and communities safe places. Let's all be advocates for safety. Let's teach our men to respect women, and let's all speak out against sexual violence and support victims and survivors. Thank you for being here. The work you're doing, whether it's internal or external, matters. And I really appreciate it. Quick request, this kind of video is the kind of video that I personally believe can be really helpful for people, but the algorithm doesn't love it because you can't run ads on it. So if you made it all the way to the end of this video, I would request that you please help me out. Help more people find this video by liking, commenting, or sharing it with someone who could benefit from it. Okay, thank you so much for watching, and please take care.